The Grand Council chamber of the Stellar Federation fell silent as first speaker Alara stepped onto the central platform. Her luminescent scales, usually a vibrant blue, had dulled to an ashen gray, a clear sign of distress among her species. The chamber, carved from living crystal deep within the asteroid capital of New Dawn, held representatives from over 300 peaceful spacefaring civilizations. Today, many seats stood empty. The crystal swarm has taken the Centauri arm. Alara's voice carried across the chamber, its usual melodic quality replaced by grim determination. 32 worlds. Gone. Not conquered. Not occupied. Consumed. Holographic displays materialized around her, showing the devastation. Entire planets reduced to lifeless husks, their surfaces carved into geometric patterns by the crystalline entities that had emerged from deep space 6 cycles ago. The Federation, for all its advanced technology and combined wisdom, had found no defense against these beings that turned worlds into vast computational arrays for purposes they couldn't comprehend. "We have failed," Alara continued, her inner light dimming further. "Our philosophy of peaceful expansion, our dedication to diplomatic solutions, these ideals have served us well for 10,000 years, but they offer no defense against an enemy that refuses all communication, that exists so far outside our understanding that we cannot even classify them as life by our standards." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Federation's inability to combat the crystal swarm had shaken their civilization to its core. Their weapons, designed primarily for defense and deterrence, barely scratched the crystalline surfaces of the invaders. Their attempts at communication were met with cold silence. Their evacuations were too slow, too methodical, to save more than a fraction of each world's population. Second Speaker Vorn, a being of pure energy contained within an intricate mechanical shell, moved forward. "Then we must seek help beyond our borders. Beyond the known." "Yes." Alara's scales flickered briefly with hope. "Our long-range sensors recently detected transmissions from an unexplored sector. A young civilization, not yet capable of faster-than-light travel. But—" She paused, her inner light pulsing with uncertainty. "They are different from any species we have encountered." The holographic displays shifted, showing intercepted broadcasts from this newly discovered world. Images of conflict flashed across the chamber. Wars, battles, duels. The assembled representatives recoiled at the violence, yet couldn't look away. These beings, these humans, fought with a ferocity the peaceful Federation species had evolved past millennia ago. "They call their world Earth," Alara explained. "They are physically resilient, surprisingly adaptable, and possess something we have lost: the warrior's spirit. Their history is filled with conflict, yes, but also with innovation born from those struggles. They create weapons we would never imagine, develop strategies that defy conventional logic, and most importantly, they never stop fighting, no matter the odds." "You cannot be suggesting." Third Speaker Malorian's crystalline form vibrated with shock. "They are barbarians. Bringing them into our space would violate every principle we hold sacred." "We no longer have the luxury of principles," Vorn countered, his energy form flickering intensely. "The crystal swarm will reach the core worlds within 2 cycles. We need warriors, and these humans, they fight with a passion we have forgotten." Alara raised her hands, commanding silence. "I have already dispatched an embassy to Earth. The transmission delays are significant, but we have received their first response. They are—" She paused, searching for the right word, intrigued by our situation. The chamber erupted in debate. Some representatives were horrified at the thought of involving such a violent species in their affairs. Others saw it as their only hope. But all knew that their civilization stood on the brink of extinction, and conventional solutions had failed them. "The humans have terms," Alara continued once the chamber quieted. "They want access to our faster-than-light technology, cultural exchange programs, and trade agreements. In return, they offer their full military capability and strategic expertise. Their full military capability consists of primitive nuclear weapons and chemical rockets. Malorian scoffed. What can they possibly offer against the crystal swarm? Alura's scales suddenly flashed brilliant blue, a sign of absolute certainty among her kind. They offer something far more valuable than advanced weapons. They offer their indomitable will. In all our observations of Earth, we have never seen them surrender when faced with impossible odds. They adapt. They innovate. They survive. The holographic displays showed new images, humans rebuilding cities after devastating natural disasters, developing solutions to seemingly impossible problems, fighting against overwhelming odds and emerging victorious. The Federation representatives watched in growing silence as they began to understand what Alura saw in these primitives. The embassy will arrive at Earth within 10 rotations, Alura announced. We are not asking these humans to fight our war for us. We are inviting them to fight alongside us, to teach us what we have forgotten, that peace is meaningless if we are not willing to defend it. The chamber remained quiet for a long moment before Vorn spoke again. And if they refuse? Alura's scales shifted to a deep purple, the color of absolute resolve. They won't. We have studied them extensively. If there is one thing humans cannot resist, it is a challenge that everyone else considers impossible. We are not just offering them a war, we are offering them the greatest challenge their species has ever faced. The fate of the Federation now rested on a gamble. That a species they had just discovered, one they might have once dismissed as too primitive and violent for contact, would prove to be their salvation. As the council session ended, Alura looked out at the assembled representatives and saw something she hadn't seen since the crystal swarm first appeared. Hope. General Sarah Chen stood at the viewport of the newly christened Earth Defense Force flagship Prometheus, watching as hundreds of ships took formation in high Earth orbit. 6 months ago, humanity had been alone in the universe. Now they were preparing to join an interstellar war. The Federation's faster-than-light technology had transformed Earth's existing space fleet in record time. What had once been clumsy chemical rockets were now sleek vessels capable of crossing light years in days. But it was what humanity had added to these ships that made first speaker Alura's crystalline scales pulse with nervous energy as she stood beside Chen. Your modifications are unorthodox, Alura observed, watching as crews loaded what looked like enormous mining lasers onto several ships. We have never considered using industrial equipment as weapons. Chen allowed herself a small smile. That's because you've been thinking like civilized beings. We're thinking like survivors. Those mining lasers, they're designed to cut through asteroid rock. Refined and focused, they should do even better against crystalline entities. The Federation's embassy had arrived on Earth with detailed scans of the crystal swarm, while the peaceful alien alliance had seen only an unstoppable force. Humanity's military strategists had seen weaknesses to exploit. The crystalline being's geometric patterns weren't just aesthetic, they were structural necessities. Admiral Rodriguez's strike force is ready, Chen's aide reported, handing her a tablet displaying the fleet's status. The Chinese and Russian contingents are in position, and the EU Space Force reports full combat readiness. For the first time in history, Earth's nations had united without hesitation. The crystal swarm wasn't just a threat to the Federation. If they weren't stopped, they would eventually reach Earth. Humanity had no intention of waiting passively for that day to come. Begin Operation Starburst, Chen ordered. All ships, commence jump sequence according to planned coordinates. The human fleet vanished in a cascade of light, reappearing at the edge of Federation space where the crystal swarm had last been detected. Federation observers watched in amazement as the Earth ships immediately split into smaller, highly mobile attack groups instead of maintaining the rigid formations they favored. Contact. The cry came from the Prometheus's sensor station. Crystal swarm vessels detected at bearing 347. Multiple signatures, moving in standard geometric formation. The main viewer activated, showing the approaching enemy. The crystal swarm ships were beautiful in their alien symmetry, perfect dodecahedrons that seemed to be carved from living crystal, their surfaces refracting starlight in mesmerizing patterns. They moved with the precision of a mathematical equation, each ship maintaining exact distances from its neighbors. "That's their weakness," Chen muttered, watching the display. "They're too perfect, too predictable." "Lieutenant Park, signal all ships to initiate protocol chaos." What followed stunned the Federation observers aboard the human vessels. Instead of engaging in organized combat, the Earth fleet seemed to dissolve into complete disorder. Ships moved in random patterns, firing their converted mining lasers from constantly changing angles. The crystal swarms, perfect formations, unable to adapt to the unpredictable assault, began to break apart. Their crystalline structure is highly sensitive to thermal stress, Chen explained to Alara as they watched the battle unfold. "Hit them with intense heat from multiple angles, and the differential expansion causes them to shatter." Basic materials science. We learned this in first-year engineering. The Federation's weapons had always struck the crystal swarm head-on, allowing their perfect geometric structure to distribute the energy evenly. But the human ships attacked from dozens of directions simultaneously, creating chaos in the very molecular structure of the crystalline beings. One of the alien ships suddenly developed a network of cracks across its surface. Moments later, it exploded into a cloud of crystalline shards. Then another fell, and another. The remaining swarm vessels attempted to adjust their formation, but the human ships were too unpredictable, too random in their movements to counter effectively. "Impossible," Alara whispered, her scales flickering with disbelief. "We fought them for 6 cycles without destroying a single ship. You've destroyed 3 in your first engagement." Chen's expression remained focused. "This is just the beginning. We're learning their patterns, adapting our tactics. Each engagement will teach us more about how to fight them effectively." But even as she spoke, something unexpected happened. The remaining crystal swarm ships suddenly changed their behavior. Their perfect geometric formations dissolved, and they began moving in patterns that seemed almost organic. "General," Park called out, his voice tense. "The enemy ships, they're adapting. They're copying our random movement patterns." Chen's eyes narrowed as she watched the tactical display. The crystal swarm wasn't just a mindless force of nature. They were learning, evolving their tactics in real time. This wasn't going to be the quick victory some had hoped for. It was going to be a long, brutal campaign of adaptation and counter-adaptation. "Well," Chen said, a grim smile forming on her face, "that makes it interesting. Signal all ships, fall back to secondary positions, and prepare for combat pattern Delta. If they want to learn how humans fight, let's give them a proper education." As the human fleet regrouped, Alara realized that her council's gamble had paid off beyond their wildest expectations. These humans weren't just warriors. They were innovators who could look at a seemingly unstoppable enemy and immediately see ways to defeat it. But more importantly, they seemed to relish the challenge of an adaptive opponent. The real war was just beginning, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy why you should never underestimate a species that had spent its entire history learning to survive against the odds. Dr. Maya Patel stood in the Federation's primary research facility on New Dawn, surrounded by holographic displays showing the latest battle data. 3 months had passed since humanity's first engagement with the Crystal Swarm, and both sides had evolved their tactics dramatically. But it was what they learned about their enemy that had everyone worried. "They're not just adapting," she explained to the assembled Federation scientists and human military leaders. "They're integrating. Every world they consume becomes part of their computational network. They're not destroying civilizations, they're absorbing them." The displays showed detailed scans of recently consumed planets. The geometric patterns carved into their surfaces weren't random. They were vast circuits, processing data in ways that defied conventional understanding. Each world was becoming part of something larger, something that grew more intelligent with every planet it assimilated. General Chen, joining via holographic projection from the front lines, frowned. That explains their tactical evolution. Every engagement makes them smarter, more unpredictable. Our initial advantages are disappearing. Not entirely, Maya countered, bringing up new data. We've discovered something interesting about their communication network. These beings don't just share information. They share consciousness. It's their strength, but it could also be their weakness. The revelation had come from an unlikely source, a cultural exchange program between humans and Federation species. While studying Federation art, a human anthropologist had noticed patterns similar to the crystal swarm's formations. This led to the discovery that the crystalline beings communicated through complex geometric resonances. Essentially, they thought in shapes. We can't beat them through pure force, Maya continued, but we might be able to disrupt their network. Think of it like introducing a virus into a computer system, but instead of code, we're using geometric dissonance. The plan was audacious. Human engineers had already begun modifying their ships to emit specific geometric patterns designed to create visual static in the crystal swarm's communication network. But to be truly effective, they needed to strike at the heart of the enemy's consciousness. We've located what we believe to be their primary computational hub, General Chen said, highlighting a sector of space on the tactical display. A cluster of 7 consumed worlds, all linked together in a complex geometric array. If Dr. Patel's theory is correct, disrupting this hub could throw their entire network into chaos. First speaker Alara, who had been quietly observing, finally spoke. The hub is deep within their territory. Reaching it would require a level of stealth we've never achieved against them. That's where we come in, said Commander James Rodriguez, stepping forward. His special operations team had spent weeks studying the crystal swarm's sensor patterns. They're looking for ships, for weapons. They're not looking for individuals. The plan was as simple as it was insane. A small team would allow themselves to be captured along with a seemingly disabled Federation vessel. The crystal swarm, true to their nature, would attempt to absorb the ship into their network. But this particular vessel would be carrying something unique. A quantum resonance device designed by human and Federation scientists working together. Once we're inside their network, Rodriguez explained, we can deploy the device. It won't destroy them, but it will disrupt their geometric language enough to break their unity. Without their shared consciousness, they're just individual crystalline entities, dangerous but not unbeatable. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. It was a plan that combined human audacity with Federation technology, born from the unprecedented collaboration between their species. But it carried enormous risk. If they failed, the crystal swarm would adapt to defend against such attacks, becoming even more dangerous. There's something else you should know, Maya added, her expression grave. Our latest analysis suggests the crystal swarm isn't just building a network. They're building something specific. Each consumed world adds to their computational power, and they're focusing all that power on some kind of calculation. Whatever they're working toward, we need to stop them before they finish. General Chen's hologram nodded. How long until the device is ready? 3 days, Maya replied. We've tested it as much as we can without alerting them. After that, it's in Commander Rodriguez's hands. As the meeting concluded, Alara approached Maya privately. When we first contacted Earth, we thought we were recruiting warriors, the first speaker said, her scales shifting through thoughtful colors. Instead, we found something far more valuable, minds that think differently than any species we encountered. The crystal swarm adapts through computation. Humans adapt through imagination. Maya smiled. That's what makes us dangerous. We don't just solve problems, we redefine them. The crystal swarm might be able to calculate every possible move in their geometric language, but they can't imagine a new language altogether. That's the human factor they can't replicate. 3 days later, as Commander Rodriguez's team prepared for their mission, Maya stood in her lab, making final adjustments to the quantum resonance device. The future of both humanity and the Federation rested on their ability to do what they did best: change the rules of the game entirely. The Crystal Swarm was about to learn that there was something more powerful than perfect calculation. Human ingenuity backed by desperate determination. Commander Rodriguez floated silently in the darkened hold of the Federation vessel Luminous Dream, watching crystalline tendrils slowly penetrate the ship's hull. The mission to infiltrate the Crystal Swarm's network had succeeded in its first phase. They'd been captured. Now came the hard part. "They're integrating us into their system faster than we anticipated," whispered Lieutenant Sarah Wong, monitoring the quantum resonance device. 2 minutes until we're fully absorbed into their network." The ship shuddered as more crystalline structures grew through its corridors. The Crystal Swarm wasn't just boarding them. They were transforming the vessel into an extension of their consciousness. Through the viewport, Rodriguez could see the massive computational hub, 7 consumed worlds connected by geometric patterns of pure crystal, pulsing with alien energy. "All teams, prepare for Phase 2. Rodriguez commanded through their secure neural link. "Remember, once we activate the device, we'll have minutes at most before they adapt. Make them count." But something was wrong. The crystalline structures weren't following their predicted pattern. Instead of methodically converting the ship, they were moving with purpose, converging on their location. "They know." Wong's voice was tight with alarm. "They're not just adapting anymore. They're anticipating." The quantum resonance device, their key to disrupting the swarm's network, suddenly sparked and went dark. Through the growing crystal formations, Rodriguez could see geometric patterns forming, patterns that exactly countered the device's planned disruption. "Dr. Patel," Rodriguez called through their long-range communicator, "the device isn't working." They knew what we were planning. Back on New Dawn, Maya Patel's hands flew over her controls, analyzing the incoming data. "Impossible. They've developed a counter-resonance pattern that perfectly neutralizes our device. The computational power required for that kind of adaptation. It's what they've been building toward." General Chen's voice cut in. "All those worlds they consumed, all that processing power, they weren't just growing. They were evolving their consciousness to a level we can't comprehend." The Crystal Swarm had achieved something beyond mere adaptation. They had reached a level of intelligence that could predict and counter any strategy based on known physics or mathematics. The Federation Council was thrown into chaos as the news spread. Some members called for immediate surrender, seeing no hope against an enemy that could outthink any tactical approach. But on the Luminous Dream, surrounded by advancing crystal formations, Rodriguez had a different reaction. He laughed. "Sir." Wong looked at her commander as if he'd lost his mind. "What could possibly be funny about this situation?" "They've made a crucial mistake," Rodriguez said, his eyes gleaming. "They've become so perfect, so predictable in their perfection, that they can't conceive of imperfection as a strategy." He opened a channel to all human forces. "All ships, initiate Protocol 0. Authorization code, human factor." Across the battlefield, human commanders received the order with grim understanding. Protocol 0 wasn't a carefully calculated strategy or a brilliant tactical maneuver. It was the opposite: deliberate chaos, random actions that defied logical prediction because they defied logic itself. Ships began moving in completely irregular patterns, firing weapons at seemingly meaningless targets, broadcasting conflicting signals. Some vessels appeared to malfunction, spinning out of control, only to suddenly attack from unexpected vectors. Others flew directly at the crystal formations with no apparent regard for survival. The Crystal Swarm's perfect predictions began to falter. Their vast intelligence, capable of calculating countless logical possibilities, couldn't process actions that had no logical basis. It was like trying to predict the plot of a story by analyzing the mathematical properties of the letters, missing the meaning entirely. "They've evolved beyond our level of intelligence," Rodriguez transmitted to all forces, "but they've evolved in a straight line. They can't handle lateral thinking, can't process actions that don't compute in their framework of perfect geometry, and mathematics. Maya's voice came through, excited. The quantum resonance device. We don't need to match their patterns perfectly. We need to create patterns that make no sense to them at all. Wam's eyes widened with understanding. She began recalibrating the device, not to create precise counter-resonances, but to generate random, chaotic patterns that defied geometric logic. The crystalline structures around them began to vibrate, their perfect patterns distorting as they tried to adapt to something that couldn't be adapted to. The vast computational network of the crystal swarm, faced with input that defied its fundamental assumptions about reality, began to show signs of strain. First speaker Alara watched in astonishment as the human fleet's apparently suicidal chaos began to have an effect. They're not fighting the swarm's intelligence, she realized. They're fighting its fundamental nature, its need for everything to make sense. The battle had reached its breaking point, but not in the way anyone had expected. The question wasn't whether humanity could match the crystal swarm's perfect calculations, but whether perfect calculation could survive contact with human unpredictability. As the crystal formations began to crack and splinter around them, Rodriguez sent one final message to all forces: remember what makes us human, not our ability to think logically, but our ability to think illogically when logic fails. Now, let's show them just how illogical we can be. The computational hub of the crystal swarm blazed with chaotic energy as human unpredictability clashed with crystalline perfection. Commander Rodriguez watched from the bridge of the luminous dream as fracture lines spread through the vast geometric networks connecting the 7 consumed worlds. The quantum resonance device, now pulsing with random patterns, sent waves of disruption through the enemy's consciousness. Multiple breaches detected in their network. Lieutenant Wong reported, her hands dancing across the controls. Their shared consciousness is starting to fragment. They can't maintain unified control while trying to process our chaos patterns. The human fleet continued its elaborate dance of apparent madness. Ships performed maneuvers that violated every principle of tactical logic, creating patterns of attack that seemed random but were carefully calculated to appear completely uncalculated. Each unpredictable action sent new ripples of confusion through the crystal swarm's vast mind. General Chen's voice crackled through the command channel. All ships maintain Protocol 0. Push harder. They're trying to isolate sections of their network to preserve their consciousness. Don't let them adapt. The crystal swarm's response was spectacular and terrifying. The geometric patterns across their consumed worlds began to shift and change, trying to create new configurations that could handle the chaos. But each attempt to adapt only exposed them to new waves of human unpredictability. Dr. Maya Patel, monitoring from New Dawn, suddenly broke into the command channel. The calculations they've been working toward, I figured it out. They're not just trying to evolve their consciousness. They're trying to understand the fundamental pattern of the universe itself. Explain. Chen demanded as her ship narrowly avoided a crystalline tendril that seemed to defy physics itself. They believe everything must have a perfect pattern, a geometric explanation, Maya continued. They've been consuming worlds to build enough computational power to calculate that pattern. But human unpredictability, our ability to act without perfect logic, it's not just disrupting their network, it's challenging their entire understanding of reality. The realization spread through the human fleet. They weren't just fighting an enemy. They were demonstrating that the universe itself couldn't be reduced to perfect mathematical patterns. The crystal swarm had evolved toward an ideal of perfect prediction and control, only to be undone by the fundamental chaos that humanity had always embraced. First speaker Alara, who had insisted on joining the final battle, watched in awe as the massive crystalline structures began to collapse. They sought to understand everything, she said softly, but in doing so, they lost the ability to understand anything that couldn't be perfectly understood. The breaking point came suddenly. A cascade of fractures spread through the computational hub as the crystal swarm's unified consciousness, unable to process or predict the chaos humanity had introduced, began to tear itself apart. The geometric patterns that had seemed so unbreakable shattered into billions of fragments. But Rodriguez noticed something strange happening as the swarm's network collapsed. The crystalline fragments weren't simply breaking apart. They were reforming into smaller, simpler patterns. "They're adapting," Wong said in surprise, "but not like before. They're breaking down into independent units. They're choosing to become less perfect to survive." The remains of the crystal swarm, their vast unified consciousness shattered, began to coalesce into smaller entities. These new forms lacked the overwhelming power of their previous network, but showed signs of something new. True adaptation rather than mere calculation. "Stand down," Rodriguez ordered as the transformation continued. "They're not fighting anymore. They're changing." Maya's voice came through again, filled with excitement. "This is extraordinary. They're not just adapting their forms. They're adapting their fundamental nature. They're learning to exist without perfect patterns." The battle ended not with the destruction of an enemy, but with the birth of something new. The crystal swarm, once a force of perfect geometric conquest, had been transformed into a multitude of independent crystalline beings, each capable of change and growth without the need for absolute control. In the days that followed, as the Federation began the long process of rebuilding, humanity found itself in a unique position. They had not only saved the galaxy, but had helped bring about a fundamental change in their former enemy. The crystalline beings, now capable of individual thought and genuine adaptation, sought to learn from the species they had once tried to consume. First Speaker Alara stood before the Federation Council one final time, her scales glowing with the bright colors of hope and wisdom. "We sought help from humanity because we needed warriors," she declared. "Instead, they taught us something far more valuable, that true strength lies not in perfection, but in the ability to embrace imperfection, to adapt not through calculation, but through creativity." The galaxy would never be the same. The age of perfect patterns was over, replaced by something more chaotic, but also more alive. Humanity had proved that their greatest weakness, their unpredictability, was actually their greatest strength. They had shown that the universe wasn't a perfect geometric pattern to be calculated, but a living, changing thing to be experienced and explored. As the sun rose over New Dawn, casting prismatic lights through the newly formed crystalline beings that now peacefully coexisted with the Federation, General Chen stood with Maya and Rodriguez, watching the dawn of a new era. "What do you think they'll calculate next?" Maya wondered, watching the crystalline beings form beautiful but imperfect patterns in the morning light. Rodriguez smiled. "Nothing. They'll do something better than calculate. They'll imagine."